the relationship between creativity and oppression. For instance, in the context of African prison literature, we have several African writers that have been detained, imprisoned, exiled, incarcerated because of their work, which has also been deemed as subversive or threatening to the rule or the ruling powers. Yet despite these challenges, these writers continued to produce works of remarkable depth that have been recognized by even some of these powers that be as having depth and beauty. The excellence of which calls for the turn to have a special breed of literature that has been described as prison literature. And a notable example is Abdullah Latif's, the Kenyan writer who was detained in 1975 for writing a Kiswahili poem titled Kenya Twampi. This poem was only 4 stanzas long, and it earned him a 5-year detention at the maximum prison in Nairobi. It was during this period, however, that he produced many more poetic pieces. And there's a particular book, Saudi Yadi, which is a casebook for postgraduate studies in politics, literature, and philosophy. It remains so till date. Similarly, we have Ngugi wa Thiong'o, another prominent Kenyan writer who was detained in 1978 without trial for his play. While in detention, Ngugi wrote Devil on the Cross and many other plays, as well as novels, which he wrote on toilet paper with stolen pen. And Ngugi has become one of the most celebrated writers that Africa has ever had. And we know a lot about this. After his release from detention, he continued to write critically about the Kenyan government, earning him a reputation as one of Africa's most courageous and innovative writers. Wole Soyinka, the Nigerian Nobel laureate, is another example of a writer who has been persecuted for his work. He was detained in the 1970s by the Nigerian military dictators for his critical writings and his intervention in the political engagements of his time. While in detention, he wrote The Man Died, a prose account of his experience in prison. And this work, which is characterized by lyricism and depth, has become the classic African prison literature. You want to compare that with Ezra Pound's Pizan Cantos. So after his release from detention, he continued to write, and he still writes, as we know, and continues to intervene. So here, I want to look at how other African writers have been persecuted. The likes of Ali Mazrui, who was detained by the Idi Amin regime, Dennis Brutus, among others. So here we're looking at the intersection of creativity and oppression and the freedom of expression in the humanities and the political intervention from and through the arts indicates that you have an intersection of these fields of study. Now, I also want to draw attention to the fact that these writers that I have mentioned had one institutional affiliation or the other. Abdullah Latif was of the University of Nairobi. Ngugi was in the University of Nairobi, was visiting professor to Makerere University. Soyinka was in University of Ibadan. He was University of Lagos, Harvard, Oxford, among other places. Ali Mazrui was in the University of Jos, Nigeria, Michigan, among other places. Then it's Brutus as well, was of the University of Witwatersrand, and then University of Pittsburgh. Now, Christopher Okigbo is another Nigerian poet that we know, who also got involved in the Civil War physically. And of course, he died during the war. The question that I want to ask on that section is to say, or to ask that, what are the impacts of the interventions of this group of writers, this group of intellectuals, and how have these forms of protests been stifled? How many more of such protests do we have now? How many writers are writing to contend with the ideologies or the posture of government? Have we come to the end of such interventions? Or how many more of these writers remain? How has creative writing, even the prizes or awards attached to them, deflected or deflect us from the essence of the functionality of the arts, and now push, as we see, for the formalist ideology, that is the arts for art's sake? Do writers, African writers, not write to support the agendas or even support the agendas of the imperialists to win those notable awards like the Nobel Prize, Booker Prize, among other prizes? So let me quickly look at the role of the intellectual writer and activist. And here I'm looking at Ken Saro-Wiwa's intervention. This intellectual writer, we all must have heard about him at some point or the other, is best known as a Nigerian writer, television producer, environmental activist, and he was best known for his activism in the Niger Delta. He's known for his influential writings and his advocacy for the rights of the Ogoni people. He attended government college and then studied English language and literature at the University of Ibadan. I'm from the University of Ibadan. I don't know if I remember to say that. Ibadan is really strategic in most of these movements in Nigeria as well as in Africa. And then you find him focusing on the social impact of Shell's oil exploration in the Ogoni land. He was a key figure in the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people, which advocated for the rights of the Ogoni people and the protection of their environment. Ken Saro-Wiwa's activism led to his arrest and execution by the Nigerian military in 1995. His influence extends far beyond his literary works. Of course, in 2010, Shell agreed to pay $55 million to a lawsuit filed by the Wiwa family and others, which alleged that Shell was complicit in the Saro-Wiwa's execution. Today, his legacy continues to inspire other writers, scholars around the world. His commitment to social justice, environmental protection, among others, remains and serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing against oppression and fighting for human rights. His legacy, once again, begs another question, which I link with Femi Osofison's question on the basis and the function of the humanities. Do the humanities humanize? What is the intersection between the humanities and the social sciences and other fields of study as we ask or we demand for academic freedom? The Dar es Salaam Declaration on Academic Freedom and Social Responsibility highlight issues concerning the reclaiming of the African university. Based on the theory of affordability, these issues can be pragmatically classified into categories that reflect on the social, structural, institutional context of African higher education. So what I tried to do was to look at the articles and try to look at how one can compartmentalize it, to say 2 or 3 articles speaks to this, 2 or 3 or 4 speaks to that, and how do we engage that going forward? Now, I want to talk about Nigeria as a type. The last time I checked, I think December, Nigeria has terms of population, and over 65%, at least over 60% of Nigeria's population comprises of the youths, those who are under 40. So I think that the role of the academic in shaping the continent's future has never been more critical, because we're looking at the people who will determine the future of Africa. We all know that Africa is also seen as the youngest continent because the youngest people in the world live in Africa. One of the most pressing issues facing African academics today is the need to reclaim their institutions as spaces for critical thinking, creative writing that is functional and not just arts, or that is functional and not that which is arts for the art's sake. We also look at intellectual curiosity, innovation, among others. The result has been that there's a decline in the quality of education. Of course, the brain drain has been ongoing for decades, and there's a disconnection between the African universities and the needs of their societies. So in this context, I see the African academic as having a critical role to play in promoting intellectual responsibility, social responsibility, community engagement, among other things. The demographic revolution, as I said, sweeping across Africa, represents both opportunities and challenges for Africans and for academics. On one hand, the youth bulge presents a tremendous opportunity for academics to shape the minds and the values of the future leaders. On the other hand, the pressure to provide education and employment opportunities for millions of young people is immense. And we also want solutions that are, actionable, that are practical, and not just like a talk shop. So I would like to conclude by saying that the struggle for for intellectual independence has been marked by tensions between the academics advocating for progressive development and the political leaders promoting superficial ideological frameworks. This has led to the undermining of universities and their autonomy, resulting in reduced funding. Let me quickly talk about funding and how that plays out. Many years ago, when I began to work in a state university in Nigeria, I wondered why we had so much problems, that even salaries could hardly be paid. And then we learned that there was, during the military regime that was still on when I began work there, that the president, that's General Sani Abacha, had instructed that all the state universities should be shut down, and that the best way to do it was to starve the universities of funds. So, well, the governor of the state that I was working in obeyed that instruction and then began to starve the university of funds. And I think that happened in very many other institutions. To say that starving institutions, universities of funds is a deliberate attempt by government to limit academics, to constrain academics, and rather than looking at it as a subtle means of doing it, it's actually a deliberate, a slow, deliberate, and purposive way of taking power from them, such that right now it's almost impossible for you to say, to point at people who really want to fight the cause, because they have been broken in many ways, they have been limited in many ways. Many people have lost their lives, they've lost their jobs, and there are lots of issues that I think we can still debate on. So I would like to end my presentation by saying that the review of this declaration should speak more specifically to education and human emancipation, the obligation of the state, the rights and responsibilities, student rights, autonomous academic organization, social responsibility, as well as continental issues. Thank you very much.
Plus fort. Non, vous devez ces applaudissements à Adedoyin. Je voulais te dire que je suis contente que ton papier qui a été préparé pour un panel sur le panafricanisme soit le dernier papier présenté dans ce panel sur le genre. Ça prend énormément de choses. Merci pour le travail que tu as fait sur la déclaration, notamment le travail qui regarde les intersections entre les humanités et les sciences sociales. Bayo, tu peux témoigner que ça, c'est une préoccupation pour le CODESIA. Mais je pense qu'une autre préoccupation du CODESIA, mais que vous avez toutes les quatre montré, c'est que nous parlons beaucoup du patriotisme épistémologique. C'est une question récurrente dans notre communauté. Les gens écrivent des livres, ne les publient pas au CODESIA, mais vont les publier ailleurs. Les gens écrivent des papiers, citent d'autres personnes qui disent de manière beaucoup moins bonne ce que le CODESIA a dit sur l'Afrique. Mais ce que vous avez fait, toutes les quatre, c'est d'avoir montré ce patriotisme qui nous indique que les femmes africaines, féministes et les autres auteurs africains, sur les études féminines, ont beaucoup produit pour donner une autre image de notre société. Merci aussi à vous quatre d'avoir montré les relations éthiques entre l'État et les universités. Oui, entre l'État et les humanités. Parce que et les humanités et les social scientistes faisons un travail qui a une portée subversive. La portée de notre travail, subversive de notre travail, atteint d'abord l'ordre établi. Merci enfin de nous avoir démontré que les femmes et les artistes ont cela de commun. C'est parce que nous voulons reculer les barrières de la domination. Je vais maintenant avoir 30 minutes pour organiser le débat. Et je suis sûre que vous allez avoir la même préoccupation que moi. Vous allez poser des questions ou apporter des contributions en ne dépensant pas 1 minute et demie ou bien 2 minutes pour permettre au maximum de poser les questions dans les 20 prochaines minutes. Je vois la main de Pendambo. Je vois là-bas Égypte. Je vois ici quelqu'un qui a déjà parlé ce matin. Et je vois là-bas. Donc, moi, je veux être équitable. Je commence par la gauche parce que mon coach est ici, il va à gauche. Bon, donc je vais dire Penda, Afrique du Sud, le garçon là-bas est Marie Cetrena. Ça m'a fait 4 et je viens ici, à droite.
Je peux?
Oui, Penda.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Si je prends la parole, ce n'est certainement pas par solidarité avec les femmes qui ont fait d'excellentes présentations. Mais je voudrais souligner un fait, surtout par rapport à l'Égypte. Au mois d'octobre dernier, j'étais invitée par le ministre du House pour participer à la grande conférence sur les femmes prédicatrices. Et tous les oulémas qui étaient là avaient souligné l'importance de la femme que vous avez évoquée tout à l'heure, qui a vendu ses bijoux, peut-être son terrain, pour financer la fondation de l'Université du Caire. On n'en parle pas beaucoup, pratiquement dans le monde arabo-pacifique. Et ce que l'on retient, c'est-à-dire l'Égypte, bénéficie d'un héritage exceptionnel en matière d'idées pour promouvoir l'émancipation de la femme. Les études féministes, Al-Azhar, à un moment, étaient dirigées par une femme. Mais pour diriger les études féministes, il faut retourner aux études de Ahmed Amin Kassem Hamid, qui au 19e siècle déjà, parce qu'il était un membre de la NAFTA, s'est beaucoup battu pour l'émancipation et l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes, soutenu aussi par Nasser plus tard. Et c'est le moment de rendre un hommage à Shahida El-Baz, à Helmi Sharawi, Arab Centre. Combien de fois sommes-nous allés au Caire pour cet héritage justement et participer au symposium sur la femme du Caire? Je crois que dans le monde musulman, on n'exploite pas beaucoup ce qui s'était passé pendant toutes ces périodes-là en Égypte, particulièrement concernant les études féministes. Quelque chose d'important aussi, de mon point de vue, toutes les féministes que nous avons connues depuis Nawal Sadawi, même en passant par des gens comme Margot Badran, etc., il y a une accumulation très importante de connaissances, de savoir sur la femme de façon générale musulmane, mais égyptienne plus particulièrement. Nous devons, à mon avis, comme pour l'Égypte, nous appuyer sur nos héritages,
Penda.
comme vous l'avez évoqué, même Touti Marème, comme vous l'avez évoqué sur justement le matriarcat et le système matrilinéaire, bien mis en évidence par Cheikh Anta, comme vous l'avez vu, toute l'Afrique. Nous devons nous partir de cet héritage pour construire une vision féministe de la femme, parce que nous avons énormément d'éléments pour créer la rupture et poser les véritables problèmes et renoncer au système d'acculturation qui nous a amené le patriarcat. Le patriarcat n'est pas notre fait. Le patriarcat, c'est indo-européen. Il faut nous départir de cela. Comme Mariam l'a souligné, toutes les femmes, le milieu universitaire, il n'y a pas un milieu plus misogyne que les milieux universitaires.
Aidez-moi à modérer Penda.
Non, il faut dire des choses importantes.
Je vais passer la parole. J'avais désigné un deuxième et une quatrième. Non, c'est très bien. C'était très bien. Excellente contribution.
Thank you.
Ici et maintenant. Oui.
Thank you so much to this really excellent panel. One short point, Catherine, you spoke about needing to renegotiate patriarchal cultures in our institutions. And I think that echoed quite strongly what Omnia was saying about we mustn't just replicate existing structures. We get the representation right, but we don't change the structures. I just wondered, there are two quick points I wonder if you could comment on. The one is the emotional labor that women are expected to do in the university. So we get better representation, but the emotional labor in terms of administration, organization, and care and well-being of students that often, not always, but often rests on women's shoulders. And I wonder how, you know, now we expect it to be leaders as well as doing that emotional labor. And then the issue of all of the presentations spoke very strongly about how patriarchy has harmed women. But I think we also need to look at how patriarchy has really harmed men, and how if we're going to convince men to them too. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful panel.
Merci. Ce sont des hommes, donc les hommes qui sont punis par le système patriarcal. Vous avez entendu. Bon. Oui.
Merci. Salam alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. J'ai été resté silencieux jusqu'à maintenant, mais la question gender m'interpelle. Pour ceux qui se souviennent, je pense à professeur Ali Koché, à Debayo se souvient. J'étais invité à Dakar lors du séminaire de l'Institut Gender, Genre et Enseignement supérieur en Afrique, qu'a dirigé la professeure Pendambo, ici présente. Et donc, on a abordé ces différentes facettes de la question gender. On a buté sur la question gender, la place de l'homme, la place de la femme dans une société donnée, la recherche d'harmonie et d'équilibre. Et la question féministe qui pose la question de l'égalité parfaite entre l'homme et la femme. Et au cours des débats, on a abordé certaines questions. Par exemple, en tant que musulman, je m'assume en tant que musulman, il y a le précepte islamique, l'héritage, la femme hérite la moitié de ce qu'hérite l'homme. Là, je me souviens très bien de la réponse que m'a donnée le professeur Pendambo. Vous faites une lecture littérale du texte coranique, parce que c'est un précepte islamique et non pas un construit social. Et donc, tout musulman devrait l'appliquer. Alors, en revenant en Algérie, j'ai fait un ouvrage en reprenant toutes les communications et tous les débats et tout ce qui a été discuté au cours de là. Et cet ouvrage, je l'ai publié, Gender et enseignement supérieur en Afrique, avec un aperçu spécial sur l'Algérie, dans les éditions universitaires européennes. Cet ouvrage, je l'ai dédié à ma mère, une femme de rare intelligence qui a appris à parler français et espagnol pour avoir fréquenté une jeune fille espagnole réfugiée d'une famille de la guerre de 1936 en Espagne, qui sont venus en Algérie, dans le village où habitait ma mère, habitait juste à proximité. Ma mère a appris, avec le contact de la petite fille, à apprendre le français et l'espagnol. La petite espagnole a été scolarisée, ma mère ne l'a pas été. À cette époque, rares étaient les filles, parce que je pense en dynamique, comment l'évolution a été faite. Ma mère n'a pas eu cette chance. À cette époque, rares étaient les filles qui étaient scolarisées. Ma mère, on l'a mariée à un homme qu'elle n'a jamais connu. À cette époque, rares étaient les filles qui pouvaient refuser l'homme que ses parents ont choisi pour elle. Une minute, s'il vous plaît.
Non, pas une minute, mais
alors,
2 secondes.
Ma mère a voulu, elle a enfanté 7 enfants. Elle a voulu que tous ces enfants soient scolarisés. Alors maintenant, le problème qui se pose, par exemple, le cas de l'Algérie n'est pas généralisable, mais c'est un cas. La parité femme-fille, garçon a été dépassée au profit des filles dans les universités africaines. Je pense que c'est général, parce qu'en Algérie, c'est plus de 6%.
Merci beaucoup. Non, merci beaucoup. Nous allons continuer ce débat qui est très intéressant.
Il y a une question que je pose à l'assistance. La question, malgré cette parité au profit des filles, au niveau du marché du travail, elle demeure marginalisée. À peine 17% des filles travaillent dans le marché formel. On a voulu investiguer cette question.
Merci
On n'a
pour
pas
cette
trouvé de
question.
réponse.
Je vais passer au dernier orateur de la gauche.
Ok,
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Ma réflexion me paraît quelque peu utopiste, mais je pense qu'il faut commencer quelque part. Parmi les recommandations de Madame Omnia, elle a parlé de on-campus child care. Alors, ma préoccupation est celle de savoir, est-ce qu'il est possible d'envisager ce genre d'aménagement pour les événements scientifiques? C'est-à-dire, est-ce qu'il est possible de permettre aux jeunes mamans de participer à des conférences nationales, pourquoi pas internationales, accompagnées de leur bébé? Je pose cette question parce que j'ai eu l'opportunité l'année dernière de participer à une conférence avec deux jeunes mamans et l'assistance avait remarqué qu'elle se déplaçait assez régulièrement. Elle sortait de la salle à un intervalle de temps assez régulier. Elle sortait en réalité pour aller tirer le lait. Ces deux jeunes mamans avaient laissé des bébés. L'une d'entre elles avait un bébé de 2 mois et l'autre un bébé de 4 mois. Et les deux venaient que la conférence se déroulait au Mozambique et elle venait d'Allemagne et des États-Unis. Mais elle souhaitait continuer avec l'allaitement maternel une fois de retour au pays. Ce qui fait que pendant toute la conférence, elle sortait de la salle assez régulièrement. Est-ce que dans l'optique... Ah, d'accord. Est-ce que dans l'optique de promouvoir la carrière académique des jeunes dames, est-ce qu'on ne peut pas envisager un aménagement pareil, c'est-à-dire permettre aux jeunes mamans...
Question bien comprise. Je viens maintenant à la droite. Non, je commence là. Là, ah non, c'est qu'on a toi, tu as beaucoup parlé. Je commence là et puis à la droite, j'ai encore, j'ai donc Sekuna et puis j'ai, donc vous serez 3. 1, 2, 3.
I'm going to argue against my colleague because as of leaking pipeline doing the caring work. So in Egypt, I am not allowed to take a leave unless a study leave if I am not caring of my husband as a married. I'm traveling with him, or I'm caring with mother, or I'm caring with my elder parents. Otherwise, that I cannot taking any leave and focusing on my research unless I have a scholarship and for study. So how we identify women in caring function, or she is an independent scholar, can doing research independent women. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I'm speaking to from Cairo. Yes, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I think the data cuts across all in the promotion issue. Promotion issue, we consider so many elements. And one of them is first author publication, winning a grant. I don't know how we are going to blind review those. But my thinking is that perhaps we can add them a point for women. But again, the challenge we have, there is an assumption that promotions are going on for everybody. We are facing a crisis in universities. There's no funding for promotions. I've been, since 2016, I have been in the university, and I think I was the last promoted directly. There's no one being promoted. So when we talk of promotions, I think, and those suggestions, we need to create more funding, first of all, and then we can add more points for women, for them to be in the first place. Thank you.
Aux panélistes, j'ai bien compris le plaidoyer de du professeur Pendambo sur le patriarcat. Ce qui me fait réagir également, c'est la contribution de notre ami de l'autre côté. Est-ce que finalement... Non, non. En fait, les deux interventions vont dans le même sens pratiquement. Est-ce que le patriarcat finalement est incompatible avec la religion musulmane? Est-ce que ça signifie la fin de l'islam, la mise à mort du patriarcat? Est-ce qu'il y a des aménagements possibles entre le patriarcat et la religion musulmane? Parce que moi, à la maison, je suis surpris souvent quand je prie avec mes enfants. Les garçons sont juste derrière moi et ma fille est derrière. Je suis conscient que je suis en train de créer déjà des inégalités, mais je suis tenu par la religion musulmane en fin de compte.
Personne à la droite. Ah, ok, vas-y. Et puis, il y avait un désespéré de la gauche là. Je vais revenir à toi. D'accord.
Thank you to the presenters. Thank you so much. I have a question for my colleague from Cape Verde. You spoke about the people whose knowledge is excluded from the university. You spoke about elders who have deep knowledge about, like women, female elders who have deep knowledge about their society, about their ecosystem. They do not speak the language of the university. And you also spoke about how you were there for so many, you were standing in place for so many young women from rural areas who were poor, who did not manage to go to university, or if they did get to university, had a really hard time in university. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you think of bringing these forms of knowledge into the university and these people into the university? Because when I look around us today, everybody here today pretty much is from a university. There's very few intellectuals outside of the university like what you described. And it was such a wonderful intervention. So can you share with us your thinking, how to bring intellectuals outside of the university into the university?
This research is about perspective that often are absent from mainstream narratives, but it's very difficult to put this knowledge into public circulation. The debate is very polarized.
I do agree
and there is a
legacy
tension,
portraiture
a moral,
system
ethical
actually
tension
affecting the
in the
gender
researchers
equality
between the
academia.
responsibility to
But
speak and
I want to say
the
that
prudence to remain
even
silent.
the women themselves, they are not even capable for challenging the portraiture system in academia.
What the Kampala Declaration
since
says in
they
its
are
original formulation
being
emphasizes the
affected
right
in
to
the
speak
mind. That's why
freely,
they are not
but the
capable to
obligation of the
compete
scholar to act with
rather
social
than men can
responsibility.
compete in academia,
And
challenging,
the same
doing
language
research
is
and
referred
so forth.
in the
But
annex
as a
we are
challenge,
discussing.
as a
So
sense to
what
like
my
a
experience
lack of funding
reveals
in
is
university.
that this
But what I
obligation
want
is
to
not
speak,
easy to
men,
fulfill,
is
especially in
I want to know that
environments where the
women,
boundary
they
between
themselves, they realize
engagement
that they
and
are
endangerment
strong
is
enough to
fluid, and
compete
when
and
political
challenge the
science
portraiture system,
signals are
because
often
what I know is
ambiguous.
they themselves, they can defend themselves. There is the agendas. Because we're speaking, not we're
the
speaking
Kampala
about
Declaration,
women
the Dar es Salaam
empowerment in
Declaration
academia.
called
We're
for
speaking in
a
a gender
vision
equality. This is the
of
gender.
academic
Therefore,
freedom that
the
combines
women
the right
themselves, they want to
think,
realize, they're
teach, and
supposed to
publish
realize
freely
that they
with a
want to
commitment to
compete to the
intellectual
men
and
in
social
academia. Thank you very much.
responsibility.